My name is Alina Vance and I wasted 50 years loving a ghost. The ghost's name was Marcus Thorne. Captain Marcus Thorne, decorated leader of the Talon unit, my husband in name and law for half a century. I stood in the oppressive silence of his study, the scent of old paper and polish failing to mask the deeper smell of finality. The memorial service's echoes still clung to my black dress. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, a woman whose tea I had served for decades with a smile, stood before me. Her face, usually a mask of gentle aristocracy, was carved from marble. This was his final wish, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth I'd foolishly believed was affection. She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. All his assets, his pension, the estate, everything goes to Celeste. And he is to be interred in the family plot, beside her. Celeste. The name was a shard of ice driven into a heart I thought had been numbed by years of neglect. Celeste Fairchild. His childhood friend, his constant shadow, his untouchable white moonlight. I didn't cry. The well had run dry years ago. I simply picked up the will, my fingers tracing the crisp type of his last directives. It was the legal stamp on a truth I'd spent a lifetime ignoring. I was the placeholder, the respectable wife who managed his home and cared for his parents, while his heart, his journals, his secret smiles belonged to her. Where are his things? I asked, my own voice sounding strange to me. Eleanor gestured dismissively to the locked bookcase behind the desk. There. Personal effects. Sort them if you must. I waited until she left, the click of the door a period on my old life. With a key I'd never used, I opened the bookcase. Inside were journals, a series of them, bound in fine leather, spanning from his youth to just months before his final mission. I opened one at random. Celeste cried today. She's always been so fragile. I hate that I have to leave for training. Promised I'd make it up to her. Another from the year we married. Wedding day. Everything went as planned. Alina looked acceptable. Thought of Celeste. Wondered if she was wearing blue. The most recent one, dated on our last anniversary. Another year. Alina made dinner. Ate in silence. Celeste sent a photo from the lake house. She still remembers our spot. Page after page, word after word. A 50-year chronicle of adoration for another woman. My own life, my quiet dinners kept warm, my lonely nights, my patient care for his ailing father. None of it existed in this, his private canon. I was a ghost in my own marriage, haunting the edges of his real love story. The pain wasn't sharp. It was a vast, crushing weight, the collapse of a universe built on a lie. I had been the frog in the slowly boiling water, not realizing I was being cooked alive by his polite, impeccable indifference. Mission after mission, he was always too busy. I ate at the base, he'd say, walking past the dinner I'd prepared. On the rare nights he was home, my tentative touches were met with a stiffened back and a weary, "Not tonight, Alina." I counted days, then years, then decades. A devout believer at the altar of a god who never showed his face. Did I hate him? In that moment, holding the physical proof of my irrelevance, hatred was too clean an emotion. This was devastation. This was the erasure of a self I had built around him. I closed the last journal, my hands steady. A strange calm settled over me. So this was the truth. This was the punchline to the cruel joke of my life. I don't remember leaving the study. I remember standing at the large window, watching the twilight bleed into night over the Thorns' manicured gardens. I remember a final, profound exhaustion, a wish for it all to just stop. And then it did. I gasped, my eyes flying open. Not to the dim study, but to the sun-drenched chaos of my old bedroom in my parents' apartment. Pop music blared from a laptop. My phone was buzzing violently in my palm, not with funeral condolences, but with a frantic string of notifications from my best friend, Chloe. Chloe, Alina. Are you seeing this? Chloe, turn on social media now. Chloe, I'm going to murder him. I swear. At the top of the screen was a trending news alert, followed by a stark red police badge icon. The headline made the breath freeze in my lungs. Special Ops Captain Marcus Thorne spotted with childhood friend at luxury resort. My thumb, moving with a will of its own, tapped the screen. A photo loaded, painfully high definition under a blazing sun. There he was. Marcus. In casual clothes I rarely saw him in, tall and imposing as ever. He was turned slightly, listening intently to the woman beside him. Celeste Fairchild in a flowing white sundress, smiling up at him like he'd hung the sun. And his hand, the strong steady hand that wielded a rifle that signed our marriage certificate, was wrapped firmly, intimately around hers. Time splintered. The memory of this moment from my first life flooded back. The panic, the tears, the frantic call I'd made to him. His calm, reassuring voice on the line. "Alina, it's not what it looks like." She slipped. "I was just steadying her. You know, she's like a sister to me." And I, like a fool, had believed him. I had swallowed the lie, comforted him for the stress of the scandal, and marched dutifully down the aisle months later into my gilded cage. The phone in my hand vibrated again. The caller ID flashed. Marcus Thorne. He'd just finished a mission. He was calling to do damage control, to spin his story before I could form my own. In my first life, I answered with a sob in my throat. In this life, I watched the screen until it went silent. Then, with a calm that felt like it came from the very core of my 50-year-old soul, I opened my settings, found his number, and blocked him. The silence that followed was deafening, and it was mine. I slid out of bed, my bare feet cool on the wooden floor. The ghost of the future widow was gone. In her place was a 24-year-old woman with the hindsight of a lifetime. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and began to type. The document title was simple: final. Termination of engagement agreement. The words flowed cold and precise. I, Alina Vance, and Mr. Marcus Thorne hereby mutually agree to dissolve our engagement, effective immediately, due to irreconcilable differences and a fundamental lack of aligned values. I printed it, signed my name with a flourish that felt like a declaration of war, sealed it in an envelope, and booked an express courier to the Talon unit headquarters. As I watched the courier bike pull away from my window, carrying my past life in a manila envelope, I exhaled. It was a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry out 50 years of waiting, hoping, and suffocating quiet. The game had reset. But this time I knew all the rules. And I was playing for keeps. The silence after sending that envelope was a tangible thing, a clean, empty space I filled with purpose. I ignored the subsequent buzzing of my phone, calls from unknown numbers, texts from Chloe demanding updates, and a dozen missed calls from my worried mother. I needed to solidify my resolve before facing their questions. I was in the kitchen brewing a pot of strong coffee when my mother, Alina, found me. Her face was etched with concern, her hands wringing a dish towel. "Alina, honey, Marcus called the house line," she said, her voice hushed. "He said it's all a terrible misunderstanding. That he's coming home on leave soon to explain. An engagement. Ending it isn't a small thing. Are you sure?" I turned, leaning against the counter. The steam from my coffee rose between us. "Mom, it's not a misunderstanding. That photo was just the final proof. There's no real love between Marcus and me. If I marry him, I'll spend my life living in another woman's shadow. I won't do it. But he's a good man from a good family," she started, the familiar script of security and status. "A good family doesn't guarantee a good husband," I interrupted gently but firmly. "And a good man doesn't hold another woman's hand while his fiancé waits at home. My mind is made up." She searched my face, looking for the tearful, pliable girl she knew. What she found was a calm, unnerving certainty that gave her pause. She sighed, a sound of reluctant acceptance. "You've always been stubborn once your mind is set." I managed a small, genuine smile. "Like someone else I know." The next intrusion was digital. My phone lit up with a name that sent a cold ripple through my newfound peace. Celeste Fairchild. Of course. The white moonlight couldn't stay in the shadows for long. I let it ring, imagining her rehearsing her lines. When she called a second time, I answered, saying nothing. "Alina." "Oh, thank God you picked up." Her voice was a masterpiece of tearful anxiety, a delicate warble designed to evoke protection. "Please, you have to believe me. Don't be angry with Marcus. It was all my fault. I slipped on the wet tiles by the pool and he just reached out to catch me. We never imagined someone would take a picture. Please don't break off the engagement because of my clumsiness. You two are perfect for each other." I listened, silent, to the entire performance. In my first life, this act had disarmed me completely. I'd ended up comforting her. Now I heard the calculated pitch, the strategic pauses for choked sobs. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice flat and cool. The sobbing cut off with a hiccup of surprise. "Celeste," I continued, each word precise as a scalpel. You can drop the act. There's no audience here but me. I know exactly what's between you and Marcus. I'm ending the engagement. If you want my leftovers, you're welcome to them. But don't ever play the fragile victim for my benefit again. The silence on the other end was profound. Then her voice changed, shedding the sweetness like a snake sheds its skin. It was sharper, tinged with panic and venom. Alina, how can you be so cruel? Marcus and I are like family. I've always thought of you as a sister. Shut up, I said, the ace in my voice finally cracking to reveal the steel beneath. Don't you dare call me your sister. It's disgusting. I took a slow breath. And tell your beloved Marcus to sign those papers quickly. Otherwise, I'll make sure the next photo that trends isn't just of you holding hands, but of the hotel receipt for the single room you shared at the Solara resort. A sharp, indrawn breath. Then the line went dead. I blocked her number. Peace, however, was a fleeting concept around people like Celeste. 2 hours later, my doorbell started ringing, persistent and maddening. Through the peephole I saw her. She'd amplified the pitiful angel look, swollen eyes, a tasteful fruit basket in her hands, the very picture of remorse. I ignored it. She kept ringing. I heard neighbors' doors crack open. With a sigh, I unlocked my door, opening it just a sliver. Alina, she cried, fresh tears springing to her eyes. I had to come apologize in person. Please, you can't call off the wedding. It's all my mistake. Her voice was perfectly projected for the hallway audience. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her silently. When she finished, I said, "Are you done? You can leave now." Her expression faltered. Then, with a dramatic gasp, she dropped to her knees on the hard concrete of the corridor. "I'm begging you," she wailed, the sound echoing. "Please forgive me. Forgive Marcus. Punish me if you must, but don't throw away your future." It was a stunning display of manipulative theater. My neighbor, Mrs. Evans, peered out, her face a mask of shock and sympathy, for Celeste, of course. "Celeste," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "What act is this? The self-sacrificing martyr? Or moral blackmail?" Mrs. Evans spoke up hesitantly. "Alina, dear, she's on her knees. Can't you two talk this out calmly?" I turned to her, polite but firm. "Mrs. Evans, you don't know the whole story. This woman," I gestured to the kneeling figure, "is Celeste Fairchild. She's the one in the photo holding hands with my fiancé, Captain Marcus Thorne. Since I've decided I won't tolerate my fiancé's intimacy with another woman, I ended our engagement. And now she's here kneeling at my door begging me to take him back." I looked at the small crowd that had gathered. "So, I ask you all, who is really being bullied here?" The shift in the hallway was immediate and electric. The sympathetic murmurs turned into scornful whispers. "That's the other woman? She has the nerve to come here? Trying to make the real fiancé look like the villain. How pathetic." Celeste's face went from pale to ashen. Her performance had backfired spectacularly. "No, it's not like that," she stammered weakly. "Get up, Celeste," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, private register only she could hear. "Your show is over. And if you ever come near me again, I won't hesitate to publish every sibling-like photo and message you two have ever shared. Now get out." I shut the door on her shattered facade. I later heard the Carter family chauffeur had to come collect her, a humiliated, sobbing mess. The neighborhood gossip mill feasted for days. The first battle was mine. But I knew the war was just beginning. Marcus wouldn't accept this loss of control. He would come himself. And I needed to be ready. It was time to stop being a reactive victim and start building the life I should have had all along. I opened my laptop not to check social media but to update my resume. The design degree I'd shelved to be the appropriate officer's wife was about to get some use. The quiet after Celeste's disastrous performance was a balm. I used it to pour myself into my portfolio, updating designs with a sense of aesthetics honed over a lifetime of observing beauty from the sidelines of my own existence. I sent my resume to 3 avant-garde design studios in the city, places I'd admired in my past life but never dared approach, thinking them too unstable for a future military wife. On the morning of my first interview, as I stepped out of my building, briefcase in hand, he was there. Marcus Thorne. He was leaning against a plain, dark sedan, not in uniform but in crisp civilian clothes that still screamed military precision. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, a tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and simmering fury. He was a statue of controlled intensity blocking the path to the sidewalk. My heart didn't flutter. My breath didn't catch. A cold, clear detachment settled over me. I kept walking, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement, aiming to pass him as if he were a lamppost. Alina. His voice was a low rumble, rough with exhaustion and a command he no longer had the right to use. I didn't stop. In 2 strides he was in front of me, his hand shooting out to close around my wrist. His grip was iron, the grip of a soldier used to being obeyed. We need to talk. A wave of visceral disgust, distilled from 50 years of similar dismissals, rose in my throat. I stopped walking but didn't turn my body towards him. Let go. Alina, stop this, he said, his voice strained, the control fraying at the edges. What is this about the termination agreement? And what did you do to Celeste? She's a wreck. Can't we just sit down and have a rational conversation? I finally turned, yanking my wrist from his grasp with a force that surprised both of us. I looked him directly in the eye, and I saw the faintest flicker of confusion in his steely gaze. He was looking for the soft, pleading woman he knew. He found a stranger. Captain Thorne, I said, my voice calm and lethally polite. I thought the document was clear. The engagement is dissolved. My interactions with Miss Fairchild are a direct result of her choosing to perform a melodrama at my doorstep. You should direct your inquiries to her. His brows drew together. Is this because of that photo from Solara? He demanded, taking a sharp breath. I told you it was a misunderstanding. She slipped. Celeste slipped, I parroted, my tone dripping with mockery. You say her name with such tenderness. What's next? You'll tell me she's like a sister to you? His jaw tightened. She is. A short, humorless laugh escaped me. You and I both know that's a lie. Do you need me to show you the booking confirmation for the single suite you shared? The one with the single king-sized bed. His face went bone white. The confident mask shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. How could you possibly know that? How I know is irrelevant, I said, taking a small step forward, invading the space he usually dominated. What matters is that I no longer care. I watched the panic dance in his eyes and I felt nothing. Whether you two are soulmates or just having a sordid little affair, it's all the same to me. I, Alina Vance, have no interest in a man whose heart and loyalty belong to someone else. Alina, he barked, his voice rising, a vein pulsing at his temple. The public humiliation was a poison he wasn't used to swallowing. You will not speak of her that way. There is nothing sordid between us. Holding hands is innocent. Sharing a room is innocent. Your definition of innocence is remarkably flexible, Marcus. I tilted my head. What's the threshold? Should I walk in on you both to make it real? He was trembling now, with a rage so potent it vibrated the air between us. He'd never been challenged like this, least of all by me. The docile fixture in his life had grown fangs. Captain Thorne, I said, my voice dropping to a deliberate final cadence. Understand this clearly. It's over because I am done. Not because I'm throwing a tantrum. Not because I want you to chase me. I am done. Consider yourself. I paused, letting the word hang, dumped. I watched the storm of emotions break across his face. Disbelief, fury, a wounded pride so deep it almost looked like hurt. It meant nothing. I turned on my heel and walked away, towards the subway, towards my interview, towards my future. I didn't look back. The interview was at a studio called Aperture. A sleek space filled with natural light and the quiet hum of creative energy. The director, a man named Elias Kane, was in his late 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and an air of intense focus. He reviewed my portfolio, not just the old college work, but the new pieces I'd poured my soul into. This, he said, tapping a digital rendering of a minimalist interior space, has a maturity to it. A sense of weathered peace. It's unusual for someone your age. I've had a lot of time to think about space, I said truthfully. He hired me on a trial basis for a major rebranding project for a boutique hotel. The work was immersive, demanding, and exhilarating. For the first time in either of my lives, I was using my mind for myself. I stayed late, learning new software, sketching concepts, my world narrowing to the glow of my screen and the shared purpose with my team. The peace was shattered one evening as I left the studio. Elias and I had been the last ones finalizing a pitch. He offered me a lift and, tired, I accepted. As his car pulled up to my apartment complex, my blood ran cold. Marcus was there again, leaning against his car, a constellation of cigarette butts at his feet. The streetlight carved his profile into something harsh and desperate. Elias slowed the car. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I passed," I replied, the words heavy. "I'll handle it." I got out. Marcus straightened, his eyes locking onto me, then flicking to Elias idling in the driver's seat. His face darkened. "It's late," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous thrum. "He drove you home." "That's none of your concern, Captain," I said, keeping my distance. "None of my concern?" he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. "I've been dealing with the fallout from your little stunt for weeks. Board meetings, reputation management, and here you are coming home after dark with another man." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Elias is my director. We were working. Not everyone spends their evenings indulging in emotionally charged sibling vacations. "Don't talk about her," he roared, the sound raw and startling in the quiet night. His composure snapped. "I'm talking about you. Is this why? Is he the reason you've become this cold stranger?" He pointed a furious finger at Elias, who was now getting out of the car. "The only stranger here is you, Marcus." I shot back, a lifetime of suppressed hurt giving my voice a sharp, trembling edge. "We are over. Who I work with, who drives me home, it has nothing to do with you. What right do you have to question me? The right of a man who pines for another woman? The right of someone who took every ounce of my devotion and called it obligation." My words hung in the air, charged and final. I saw it then, the dawning, awful realization in his eyes. He was truly seeing me for the first time, not as an extension of his life, but as a separate person, one who had judged him and found him desperately wanting. Elias walked up beside me, a calm, solid presence. "Sir," he said to Marcus, his tone even but unyielding, "you need to leave." Marcus's gaze swung to him, blazing with a possessive, feral rage. Without warning, he lunged, fist flying towards Elias's face. "Marcus, no!" I screamed. Elias moved with surprising speed, deflecting the blow with his forearm. "I won't fight you, Captain," he said coldly. "But I will call the police." The scuffle drew attention. A security guard jogged over, a neighbor's light flicked on. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched, looking from Elias's protective stance to my furious, tear-streaked face. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a hollow, devastated exhaustion. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the ghost of the boy he might have been, lost and regretful. "Alina Vance," he whispered, the sound torn from him. "You're good at this. Really good." He turned, got into his car and sped away, the engine's roar a fading scream into the night. I slumped against Elias's car, the adrenaline crashing, leaving me weak. The tears that came weren't for Marcus. They were for the finality of it, for the ghost of the love I'd carried for so long finally being laid to rest. Elias didn't speak. He just handed me a handkerchief from his pocket. In that simple, wordless gesture, I felt a kindness more genuine than any Marcus had ever shown me. The tie was severed. Now I had to ensure it stayed that way. Because people like Celeste Fairchild didn't accept defeat. They plotted comebacks. And I knew her next move would be dirtier. The confrontation with Marcus left a strange quiet in its wake. He didn't call. He didn't show up. For a week, the only battles I fought were over color palettes and structural concepts at Aperture. Elias proved to be a brilliant, demanding mentor, and under his exacting eye, my skills sharpened. The hotel project was taking shape, a serene, modern oasis that felt like the physical manifestation of the peace I was trying to build. But the silence was deceptive. I knew Celeste. Humiliation was a fuel for her, not a deterrent. The first sign was a whisper in the studio. Laura from marketing glanced at me oddly during a coffee break. Then I noticed the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the lounge. The digital attack came a day later. Chloe sent me a link, her message blazing with fury. "Who is doing this?" It was a private forum, one of those toxic gossip hubs. The thread title was vile. "Gold Digger Junior Designer Sleeps Her Way to the Top at Aperture." There were photos, cleverly cropped and edited. Me and Elias leaning over a blueprint, our heads close. Elias's car outside my apartment that night, grainy and sinister looking. The narrative was clear. I was an ambitious seductress who dumped her heroic fiancé for a richer, more connected boss. The comments were a sewer. They dissected my clothes, my smile, invented lurid details about late-night meetings. My hands shook as I scrolled, not from hurt but from a cold, clarifying rage. This was Celeste's handwriting. The meticulous framing, the victim playing, the underhanded stab at my professional integrity. It was all her. Elias called me into his office. His face was granite. "Have you seen this?" he asked, turning his monitor to show the same forum. "Yes. It's libelous nonsense," he stated, his voice clipped. "I've already contacted our legal team. We will trace the IP addresses and issue cease and desists." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "This is a targeted attack, Alina. This isn't random internet trolling. Do you know who's behind it?" I met his eyes. "I have a very strong suspicion. The childhood friend." I nodded. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "A frontal assault on your character. Predictable but effective in the short term. It muddies the water, shifts sympathy." He paused. "We need to cut off the source, not just defend against the symptoms." His use of "we" sent a wave of gratitude through me. He wasn't throwing me to the wolves to save the studio's reputation. He was strategizing. "I might have a way to do that," I said slowly, the plan crystallizing in my mind. It was a move from my future memories from watching the Thorne family navigate corporate scandals. "But I'll need to access some unofficial channels." Elias studied me for a long moment. The woman who had calmly ended an engagement with a special ops captain, who faced down public melodrama, who now wanted to go on the offensive. I saw the curiosity in his eyes and something else: respect. "Do what you need to do," he said finally. "The studio will back you. But be careful. And be sure." I went back to my apartment that night not to cry but to dig. In my past life, bored and lonely, I'd become an adept online researcher following the social trails of the elite. I remembered snippets. A scandal involving Celeste's favorite jewelry brand, whispers about a married tech mogul she'd been seen with, her sudden acquisition of a luxury apartment that her family's modest wealth couldn't explain. I reached out not to a lawyer, but to an investigative journalist named Anya Petrova, whose byline I remembered from a future expose on defense contract corruption. I created a secure, anonymous account. "I have information on Celeste Fairchild," I typed. "It's more valuable than her fake gossip about me. Details on offshore accounts, gifts from married benefactors, and her paid smear campaigns. Interested?" The reply was almost immediate. "Proof." I sent her the first tranche. Screenshots of Celeste's private, since deleted social media boasts about generous friends, blurred but identifiable receipts for gifts, and the crown jewel, a cryptocurrency transfer log I'd unearthed from a hacked forum, a skill from my future widow's lonely, tech-filled nights, showing payments from an account linked to Celeste to a known online reputation management firm, the same one specializing in negative reputation management. "This is a start," Anya wrote back. "Give me 48 hours. The next 2 days were tense. The rumors at work persisted, though Elias's public statement of support had quelled the worst of it. Chloe was a berserker defending me online. My parents were worried sick. Then on the morning of the third day it dropped. Anya Petrova's piece wasn't in a gossip rag. It was in a respected mainstream digital news magazine. The headline was brutal in its precision: "The Manufactured Innocence of Celeste Fairchild. A trail of manipulation and hidden benefactors." It was a masterpiece. It laid out with forensic detail Celeste's dual life, the public fragile sweetheart and the private, ambitious social climber. It listed the gifts, the apartments, the vacations funded by various wealthy, often married men. It exposed her contract with the smear firm, directly linking it to the forum posts about me. It even had quotes from disillusioned former friends, who spoke of her calculated tears and strategic vulnerabilities. The internet exploded. The narrative flipped so fast it gave whiplash. The comments on my forum thread were now flooded with things like, "So he was the gold digger all along?" Projecting much. "And she tried to ruin that other girl's career because she failed to steal her fiancé?" Psycho. Celeste's social media was bombarded. Her friends vanished. The Thorne family, I heard through Chloe who heard through a society grapevine, was apoplectic. Eleanor Thorne, in a rare public statement, was quoted as saying, That person is not and never will be welcome in our family. The most telling silence came from Marcus. Chloe, who had a friend at the Talon unit's administrative office, told me in a hushed, gleeful voice. He got the news in a briefing. Word as he walked out went to the firing range and put 300 rounds downrange without a word. He hasn't taken a single call from her since. His phone is apparently switched off. I felt no triumph, only a grim sense of justice served. The weapon she tried to use on me had turned in her hand. A few days after the article, Elias stopped by my desk. The hotel client loved our revised pitch, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. We got the contract. Full rebrand, interior and exterior. That's fantastic, I said, a real smile breaking through my own fatigue. It is, he agreed. He lingered for a moment. You handled that external situation with remarkable effectiveness and discretion. He didn't ask for details. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. Don't make a habit of attracting that kind of attention. But know that when you do, you have the studio's support. He walked away and I looked out the window at the city skyline. The air felt cleaner. The path ahead for the first time felt truly my own. The ghosts of my past life were being exorcised one by one. But I knew the final confrontation with the primary ghost still awaited. Marcus wouldn't fade away with a scandal. He would need an ending, a finality written in terms he couldn't ignore. And I would be the one to write it. The fallout from Celeste's exposure created a strange, suspended atmosphere. The toxic chatter at work died completely, replaced by a respectful, almost wary curiosity. I was no longer just the new designer. I was the woman who had survived a public scandal and emerged with her career not just intact but advancing. The hotel project, now officially ours, became my sanctuary. I lost myself in fabric swatches, lighting plans, and 3D models, building something beautiful and tangible from the chaos. A month passed in this productive bubble. I assumed Marcus had licked his wounds and retreated into the rigid structure of his unit, perhaps finally accepting the new reality. I was wrong. The call came late on a Thursday evening. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was for the military base. A part of me knew even before I answered. Alina. His voice was ruined. Hoarse, cracked, stripped of all its former authority. It was the voice of a man who hadn't slept, who had been screaming into silence. The sound of it, so broken, sent an unexpected jolt through me, not of pity but of recognition. This was the sound of a worldview collapsing. Can we meet? He rasped. Just once. Face to face. There are things I need to say. I promise it will be the last time I ask. The last time. A closing of a door. I knew I owed myself this. Not for him but for me. To look the ghost of my past life in the eye and formally bid it farewell. All right, I said, my own voice calm in contrast to his wreckage. Name a place. He chose a quiet tea house in the old city, a place of dark wood and hushed tones, far from our usual haunts. When I arrived, he was already there, seated in a secluded booth. The sight of him was a shock. Marcus Thorne had always been defined by a contained power, a physical presence that commanded a room. The man who stood awkwardly as I approached was a shadow. He'd lost a significant amount of weight, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame. His face was gaunt, the sharp angles stark, dark circles like bruises under eyes that had lost their predatory focus. He was clean-shaven, his hair regulation short, but it only emphasized the hollows in his cheeks. The captain was gone. In his place was a stranger, haunted and weary. You came, he said, the words scraping out. He didn't try to pull out my chair. He just sank back into his own as if the effort of standing had drained him. I sat, placing my bag beside me, a barrier. I'm here. He stared at his hands clasped on the tabletop. They were still a soldier's hands, broad and capable, but now they looked like they were holding on to the edge of a cliff. The silence stretched, thick with unsaid things. I read it all, he began, not looking at me. Anya Petrova's article. Every word. Then I had my own people look. I accessed records, financial trails, things I shouldn't have. He finally lifted his gaze. The steely gray was clouded with a pain so profound it was almost physical. It was all true. Every bit of it. The gifts, the men, the payments to ruin you. He took a shuddering breath. I was stupid, Alina. Blind. For years. She played the perfect victim, the fragile flower who needed protecting. And I bought it. I built my entire understanding of loyalty around protecting that lie. His voice broke. And in doing so, I betrayed the only real loyalty I ever had. He was talking about me. The realization should have felt vindicating. It felt sad. I didn't just take you for granted, he continued, the words coming in a torrent now as if a dam had burst. I used you as a shield. A respectable, quiet, uncomplaining shield so I could play the noble protector to her without the world, or my family, judging me. I convinced myself that my duty to you was in providing stability, a name, a home. I told myself that was enough. That you were content. A harsh, self-loathing laugh escaped him. Content. God, what an arrogant fool. I read your name on that termination agreement and it was like a bullet. But it was the look in your eyes that day outside your building. That was the kill shot. You looked at me like I was a stranger. Worse, like I was a contemptible stranger. He finally met my eyes fully, and the raw, unfiltered regret there was almost difficult to witness. I didn't stop loving you, Alina. I think I just buried it under this mountain of fabricated obligation to her. I got so used to the narrative, Marcus and Celeste, the tragic misunderstood bond, that I forgot to check if the story was true. And I forgot to see the woman right in front of me. He reached for his teacup, his hand trembling slightly. When the article came out, it wasn't just her lies unraveling. It was my entire world. My judgment, my perception, my honor. Everything I built my identity on was a joke. And the punchline was that I had sacrificed you for it. I listened silent. In my first life I would have given anything to hear these words. I would have wept with relief, forgiven him instantly, and thrown myself into the exhausting work of rebuilding. Now they were just words. Heavy, tragic, but ultimately irrelevant to the architecture of my new life. Alina, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I am so sorry. If I could go back, if I had just opened my eyes. There are no ifs, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through his anguish. You can't go back. I can't unlive the life I had. The waiting. The silence. The coldness. Reading your will. I paused, seeing his face blanch at the mention of it. He didn't know I knew. Not in this timeline. But the memory gave my next words a weight that resonated from a deeper place. Some betrayals create a chasm that can't be crossed. Not with apologies, not with regret. He flinched as if struck. Is there truly no chance? Not even a fraction. This isn't about giving you another chance, I said, shaking my head slowly. This is about me taking my first real one. I don't hate you. But the love I had for you, it was for a man who didn't exist. The man who exists now is someone I don't know and have no desire to know. The light in his eyes, the faint, desperate hope that had kindled during his confession, guttered and died. He looked down, nodding slowly, accepting the verdict. The finality of it seemed to hollow him out even further. I've applied for a transfer, he said after a long moment, his voice flat now. A long-term deployment. The northern border outpost. I leave in 3 weeks. It was a form of self-exile. A penance chosen from the limited menu the military offered. I don't know when I'll be back. Or if. He finally looked at me again, a ghost of his old steadiness returning, but forged now in defeat. I just needed you to know. To hear the truth from me for once. However inadequate it is. I stood up. The meeting was over. The ghost had spoken its piece. Take care of yourself, Marcus, I said. It was a polite, distant wish, the kind you'd offer any acquaintance embarking on a difficult journey. His name on my lips seemed to be the final blow. He closed his eyes briefly, then gave a single sharp nod. I didn't look back as I walked out of the tea house. The autumn sun was bright, washing the old brick streets in golden light. I breathed in deeply, expecting a surge of liberation, of triumph. Instead, I felt a profound, peaceful emptiness. Like a room that had been crowded with heavy, ugly furniture for 50 years had finally been cleared out. The space was bare, but it was mine. It was full of potential, and most importantly, it was quiet. The haunting was over. The silence after Marcus left the city was different from the silence that had preceded his final confession. That had been a tense, waiting silence. This was a fertile one. With the specters of my past life finally laid to rest, The energy I'd spent on defense and emotional survival redirected itself wholly into creation. The hotel project, the Vespra, became my world. Elias was a relentless collaborator, challenging every assumption, pushing the design beyond pretty into the realm of profound experience. We argued over the texture of hallway plaster, the warmth gradient of LED strips, the acoustics of the central atrium. They were exhilarating, professional disputes, a world away from the passive-aggressive Cold Wars of my marriage. One evening, very late, we were the last ones in the studio again. A critical client revision was due at dawn. Elias was at his desk, frowning at a structural rendering, and I was pinning fabric samples to a large mood board, my back aching from hours of hunching. The indigo silk is conceptually right, but it's too flat under low light, I said, more to myself than to him. Agreed. His voice came from close behind me, making me jump slightly. I hadn't heard him get up. He reached past my shoulder, his hand brushing mine as he pointed to a swatch of deep, textured velvet. This. It absorbs and refracts. It has depth. Like a night sky. His proximity was sudden, his focus absolute on the work. I caught the faint, clean scent of his soap and the graphite from his pencils. A simple human smell. I nodded, my throat unexpectedly tight. Yes. That's it. He didn't move away immediately. You have a good eye for the emotion of a material, he said, his gaze still on the board. I've had a lot of time to feel textures, I replied, the truth of it slipping out. He finally looked at me, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The past tense suits you. It wasn't a question. He drove me home again that night. The streets were deserted. The silence in the car was companionable, charged with the shared satisfaction of solving a difficult problem. The transfer came through for your ex-fiancé, Elias said abruptly, his eyes on the road. Northern Border Outpost. It's a hard posting. 2-year minimum, isolated. I wasn't surprised he knew. Elias Kane seemed to have sources everywhere. I heard, I said quietly. A self-imposed sentence, he mused. An interesting choice. Most men in his position would dig in, fight for status, try to reclaim the narrative. He chose to walk away from the board entirely. Maybe he finally realized the game wasn't worth winning, I said. Elias glanced at me. Or that he was playing the wrong game all along. He pulled up to my curb. I unbuckled my seatbelt. Thank you for the ride. And for the support. Through everything. You handled your battles, he said, shifting to face me slightly. The dim light from the dashboard carved planes of shadow on his face. I just provided a flanking position. The strategy was yours. He paused. You're a remarkable asset to Aperture, Alina. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. It was high professional praise. But it felt like more. It felt like being seen not as a wife or a victim but as a mind, a creator. Good night, Elias. Good night. I watched his car disappear, a new kind of warmth blooming in my chest, unfamiliar and fragile. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming fire I'd felt for Marcus. It was quieter, like the first embers in a well-built hearth. The opening of the Vespra Hotel was a triumph. The critics raved about its serene, timeless modernity, and its empathetic use of space. My name was listed in the credits, not as Mrs. Thorne, but as Alina Vance, lead design associate. Chloe dragged me out to celebrate, and for the first time in either of my lives, I felt an unadulterated personal pride. A few days later, Elias asked me to stay after a team meeting. When the others had filed out, he leaned against his desk. I've been offered a project, he said. In Kyoto. A cultural center. It's a 2-year design and build commitment. Complex, prestigious. My heart sank. He was leaving. Aperture wouldn't be the same. I've decided to take it, he continued. And I want you to come with me. As co-lead designer. The world tilted. What? You've earned it. More than earned it. You think in spaces and emotions, not just lines and costs. I need that perspective. This project demands it. He folded his arms, a challenge in his eyes. It would mean relocating. Immersing yourself in a new culture, a new design language. It's a risk. A risk. The word echoed. My entire first life had been the opposite of risk. A calculated, safe, miserable imprisonment. My second life so far had been about shedding that prison, but my goals had been reactive. Escape, survive, prove myself. This was an active choice. A leap into a future I hadn't even dared to sketch. Why me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment. Because when I look at your designs, I see someone who understands that a space isn't just for living in. It's for becoming in. The Vespera isn't just a hotel. It's a place for people to pause and remember who they are. I want to build a place that helps people discover who they could be. He took a step closer. And because, Alina, I think you're still discovering that for yourself. I'd like to see what you become when you're designing for a future, not running from a past. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness but of a dizzying, terrifying hope. He was offering me a new world, professionally and literally. And he was seeing a version of me I was only just beginning to believe in. I need to think, I managed to say. Of course, he nodded. Take a week. But don't think out of fear. Think out of possibility. I left the studio in a daze. Kyoto. Co-lead. A partnership of minds. It was everything I'd never let myself dream of. But a thread of my old life still tugged at me, a phantom limb. I realized I needed one more thing before I could leap. I needed to see the grave of my first life. Not Marcus's, but the grave of the woman I had been, Alina Thorne. I needed to make peace with her so Alina Vance could be free. I knew where she was buried. In the Thornes' private plot, next to the empty space that had been reserved for Marcus, and which would now forever remain empty beside Celeste's intended spot. I drove out of the city to the manicured, gated hillside cemetery. I found the headstone easily. It was simple, elegant, and heartbreakingly young. Lena Thorne. Beloved wife. The dates were from my future, my death, an old woman's peaceful passing that had been anything but peaceful inside. I stood before it, the ghost visiting her own marker. I'm sorry, I whispered to the ground, to the memory of that patient, hopeful, broken woman. I'm sorry you waited. I'm sorry you believed. I'm sorry he never saw you. The wind rustled the leaves of a nearby oak. But I see you, I said, firmer now. And I'm living the life you should have had. I'm taking the chances you never got. I won't forget you. But I have to leave you here. I placed a single white pebble, smooth from a river, on the base of the headstone. A token. A farewell. As I turned to leave, I felt the final ghost release its hold. The empty space within me was no longer barren. It was swept clean, ready for new foundations. I knew my answer. The week of decision passed in a blur of research and quiet introspection. I pored over books on Japanese architecture, on the philosophy of Ma, the space between, on the integration of nature and structure. The more I learned, the more the project in Kyoto called to me, not just as a career opportunity but as a spiritual one. It was a chance to build a dialogue between stillness and movement, tradition and innovation. A dialogue I felt echoing in my own soul. I also watched Elias. Not with the desperate, hungry attention I'd once paid to Marcus, but with a curious, professional appreciation. I saw how he listened, truly listened, to junior designers' ideas. I saw the respect he commanded from contractors, not through intimidation, but through undeniable competence. I saw the flicker of genuine excitement in his eyes when a concept clicked, a passion that matched my own. He was a puzzle, complex and compelling, but one I wanted to solve through collaboration, not obsession. On the final day of my self-imposed deadline, he didn't press. He simply left a fresh set of Kyoto site surveys on my desk with a sticky note that read, "The context." I spent the afternoon absorbed in topographical maps and historical notes on the neighborhood. My fingers itched to sketch. Ideas flowed. A roofline echoing a distant mountain, a courtyard that would hold the morning sun like a cup, a passageway that would frame a specific cherry tree as a living painting. When the studio emptied, I was still at my desk, a dozen rough sketches scattered before me. I heard his door open and his footsteps approach. He stopped behind me, looking over my shoulder at the drawings. I felt his stillness, his intense focus. "You're already there," he said, his voice low. "I'm terrified," I admitted, not turning around, my eyes fixed on a sketch of a water feature. "It's a huge leap. A new country, a new language, the biggest project of my life." "It is," he agreed simply. He moved to lean against my desk, facing me. "But fear is just a sign you're at the edge of something meaningful. The question is, does the meaning on the other side call to you more strongly than the comfort of the known?" I finally looked up at him. The known for me was a prison, Elias. I've just broken out. Jumping into another unknown. It feels reckless. Is it reckless? He asked, tilting his head. Or is it the first truly free choice you've ever made for yourself? His words struck the core of it. Every major decision in my first life had been in relation to Marcus, to the thorns, to being the appropriate partner. Even breaking the engagement while an act of defiance was a reaction against something. Saying yes to Kyoto would be a choice for something. For me. What if I fail? The old ingrained doubt whispered. Then we fail together, he said with a shrug that was anything but casual. It was an acceptance of shared risk, a partnership in the truest sense. And we learn. And we build something else. Failure is just a different kind of data. There was no guarantee of romance in his offer, no promise beyond the professional. And somehow that made it more real, more solid. He was asking for my mind, my vision, my courage. That was a foundation I could trust. I took a deep breath, the fertile silence of the last few months solidifying into a clear, resonant note within me. Yes, I said. A slow smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes, transforming his usually serious expression into something warm and alive. Yes. Yes. I'll go to Kyoto. As your co-lead. He held out his hand, a formal, professional gesture. Partners. I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, steady. Partners. We spent the next hour talking logistics with a feverish shared energy. Visas, timelines, finding someone to sublet my apartment. It was chaotic and thrilling. As we wrapped up, he paused. There's one more thing, he said, his tone shifting slightly. My sister lives in Tokyo. She's an artist. When I told her about you, about the Vesper project, she insisted we visit her studio when we're over. She said, he hesitated, a rare unguarded moment. She said she wanted to meet the woman who designs light as if it were a solid material. The compliment coming secondhand made my cheeks warm. I'd like that. He walked me to the door. The city night was cool. We leave in 6 weeks, he said. A lot to do. I'm ready, I said, and for the first time I absolutely was. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Telling my parents was harder than I expected. My mother cried, worried about me being so far away. My father, pragmatic, asked sharp questions about the contract and my safety. But beneath their fear I saw a dawning pride. Their daughter wasn't just escaping a bad engagement. She was being actively chosen for a world-class project. Chloe threw me a bon voyage/burn the past party, which was both hilarious and deeply moving. My colleagues at Aperture gave me a beautiful set of traditional Japanese drafting tools. Through it all, Elias was a constant, calm presence. We worked side by side daily, the dynamic between us evolving into an easy, intuitive rhythm. We debated, we compromised, we inspired each other. The more we planned our professional future, the more the space between us hummed with a quiet, unspoken potential. The night before our flight, I stood in my nearly empty apartment. My suitcases were packed. All that remained of my old life were a few boxes in storage. I felt untethered but not afraid. I felt light. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, but I recognized the northern border area code. Safe travels, Alina. It was the briefest of messages. No plea, no regret, just an acknowledgement. A final, distant salute from the ghost. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message and blocked the number. That chapter was not just closed. The book was being donated. The next morning, Elias picked me up. He loaded my bags into the taxi with efficient ease. As we sped towards the airport, the city I'd lived in for 2 lifetimes receded behind us. Nervous? He asked. Exhilarated, I corrected, gazing out at the horizon. He smiled. Good. At the airport, navigating check-in and security together felt natural. We were a team. Settling into our seats on the plane, the enormity of it finally hit me. I was crossing an ocean, leaving every vestige of my old identity behind. As the plane taxied, Elias, who had been reviewing notes, looked over at me. You know, he said, his voice barely audible over the engine's whine, the best designs aren't about imposing a vision on a space. They're about listening to what the space wants to become and then helping it get there. I met his gaze. What do you think this space wants to become? I asked, gesturing vaguely between us at the adventure ahead. He considered it, his eyes thoughtful. I think it wants to become something true. Something built on respect, on shared purpose. Something that can withstand both quiet mornings and typhoons. He paused. I'm looking forward to finding out. He reached over and, after a moment's hesitation, covered my hand on the armrest with his. It wasn't a romantic claim. It was a connection. An anchor point for the leap we were taking together. As the plane lifted off, pressing me back into my seat, I didn't look down at the shrinking city. I looked ahead through the small window at the boundless sky and the wide, welcoming unknown. The woman who had waited was gone. The woman who was building had just taken flight. Kyoto was a sensory revelation. The air smelled of incense, damp earth, and diesel. The city was a tapestry of serene temples woven with threads of bustling modern life. Our temporary apartment was small, traditional, with paper screen doors that glowed softly in the morning light and a tiny, immaculate garden. It was the polar opposite of the Thorns' cold, grand manner. It felt alive. Work began immediately. The site for the cultural center was a challenge. A narrow plot nestled between a historic shrine district and a modern commercial street. Our task was to build a bridge, both literal and metaphorical. The first weeks were a crash course in local building codes, material sourcing, and navigating a business culture with its own intricate, unspoken rules. Elias handled the high-level meetings with stoic grace, while I immersed myself in the workshops of local craftsmen, the wood joiners, the papermakers, the stone masons. I learned to bow correctly. I learned that yes could sometimes mean I hear you, not I agree. I learned the profound patience required to build consensus. I made mistakes, fumbled with the language, and once accidentally ordered what felt like a gallon of pickled plums. Through it all, Elias was there not as a savior but as a fellow learner. We'd debrief over steaming bowls of ramen, exhausted but buzzing, comparing notes and strategizing. One evening, after a particularly grueling day with a stubborn concrete supplier, we took a long walk through the Pontocho alley. The lanterns were lit, casting a warm golden glow on the ancient wooden facades. He still sees concrete as just a structural material, I fumed. He doesn't understand we want it to breathe, to have a texture that holds shadow. Then we show him, Elias said, his hands tucked into his pockets. We take him to the Katsura Imperial Villa. We let him run his hands over the walls. Some truths need to be felt, not explained. His solution was typical, direct, experiential, bypassing argument for understanding. It was why he was a great designer. You're right, I sighed, the frustration leaking away. It's just slow. Good things are, he said simply. He glanced at me. You're adapting faster than I expected. You have a resilience. It's not hardness. It's more like bamboo. You bend under pressure, you don't break. The compliment, so specific and observed, warmed me more than the sake we'd had with dinner. I had a good teacher in patience, I said, thinking of my decades of waiting. Now I'm just learning a different kind. We walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the city a distant murmur. The space between us, which had hummed with potential on the plane, had begun to solidify into a deep, comfortable trust. We were partners in the trenches. It was the most solid relationship I'd ever known. A month in, we visited his sister Aiko in Tokyo. Her studio was a chaotic, beautiful explosion of color and form. She was all vibrant energy and sharp intelligence, the opposite of Elias's contained focus. She hugged me immediately as if we'd known each other for years. So you're the one who tames my brother's austere lines with soul, she declared, looking me up and down with an artist's appraisal. Good. He needs it. Elias rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. Aiko showed me her work, large abstract paintings that seemed to capture the very movement of wind and water. As we talked about the interplay of negative space in her art and in my designs, I felt a spark of pure intellectual kinship. Later, as Elias discussed family matters with her in rapid Japanese, she leaned over to me and whispered in English, "He talks about your work with a light in his eyes I haven't seen since he was a boy building tree houses. Be careful with him. He's more fragile than he looks." The warning, or perhaps the permission, lodged in my heart. The project progressed. Our design evolved, becoming richer for its struggle with the context. The center's central atrium, my heart space, began to take shape in the models. A soaring volume where light would fall through a latticework ceiling, tracing the sun's path across the floor like a giant, silent sundial. One stormy afternoon, typhoon winds lashing the windows of our site office. We were reviewing structural calculations. The power flickered and went out, plunging us into a gray, shadowed gloom. Elias lit a few battery-powered lanterns, their light casting dancing shapes on the walls covered in our drawings. "Well," he said, his face painted in warm, shifting light and deep shadow. "No more work today. The grid's down." We sat on the floor, leaning against a cabinet, sharing a thermos of green tea. In the intimate, storm-bound quiet, the usual professional boundaries felt porous. "Why design?" I asked him, the question slipping out. "What's the core of it for you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard. Then he said, "Shelter." He looked at the lantern flame. "Not just from rain and wind. Shelter for moments. For a thought to form. For a breath to be taken. For a memory to be made. I build shelters for human experience." He glanced at me. "You. I think. I build homes for light," I said slowly, realizing it as I spoke. "I shape spaces to welcome it, to hold it, to give it a form to play with. Light was the only constant friend I had for a long time. I guess I want to return the favor." The admission hung in the air, more personal than I'd intended. The storm raged outside, a violent contrast to the still, lantern-lit world inside. "Alina," he said, my name soft on his lips. He turned to face me fully. "This project, this partnership, it's become the most important work of my life. And it's not just because of the building." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the threshold. Not of a plane but of a truth. "I know we said partners. And I meant it. I still do," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "But my feelings, they've evolved. They've deepened. Into something I can't and don't want to design around." He wasn't offering me a cage of devotion like Marcus had. He was offering me a shared blueprint. A design for a possible us, drawn with respect as its foundation and partnership as its load-bearing wall. I thought of the ghost in the cemetery. Of the empty, waiting woman. She had lived for a love that was a phantom. This here now, this was solid. This was a man who saw my mind first, and whose heart had followed with a quiet, undeniable certainty. I placed my hand over his where it rested on the floor between us. "Mine too," I said, the words a vow to this new real life. "They've deepened." He didn't kiss me then. He simply laced his fingers through mine, his grip firm and sure. The contact was an electric current, a connection more profound than any grand gesture. We sat there hand in hand, listening to the typhoon scream, safe in the shelter we were building, both around us and between us. The power came back on hours later, flooding the room with harsh fluorescence. We blinked, the spell broken but the bond forged. He helped me up, our hands lingering. "The calculations can wait until morning," he said, his voice rough. "Yes," I agreed. We walked back to our apartment through the rain-cleaned streets, not as boss and employee, not just as partners, but as two people stepping into a carefully, consciously chosen future. The path was still being drawn, but we were holding the pencil together. Years later, when the Kyoto Center for Cultural Dialogue opened to international acclaim, the reviews would speak of its harmonious dialogue between shadow and light, and its profound, welcoming serenity. They would praise the genius of the co-lead designers. What they wouldn't see was the foundation. Not just the concrete pylons driven into the earth, but the human one, built on the rubble of a past life, forged in shared purpose and stormlit honesty, and strong enough to hold up not just a building but a whole, beautiful, unexpected life. I, Alina Vance, had gone from being a stranger in my own marriage to being a co-author of my destiny. And this, I realized as I stood with Elias at the opening ceremony, our shoulders touching as we watched the first visitors enter the stream of light in the atrium, was the only design that ever truly mattered. The end.